In one of the most stunning championship weekends of all time, the Minnesota Wind Chill are the wind champions in Salt Lake City.
About damn time, huh?
It's just a really exciting league right now. No one was picking Minnesota to win it coming into this season.
We've been grinding for a long time, so I think it's all a culmination. Every year is building upon the last year.
All of life comes down to talent. What are you talking about? We're talking about performance sports.
All the way to the end zone, and what a catch! To the end zone. Will it stay in bounds? Yes!
And Madison Magic has returned to Breese Field.
Mechanix to the end zone. Knocked away! Shen, did he throw it the full 80 yards to the field? Are you kidding me? You are kidding me! Holy smokes!
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That's Cameron Brock, and we've got 2025 championship weekend details for you. Circle your calendars for August 22nd and 23rd and set your flight schedule for Madison, Wisconsin. That's right. The league's biggest event is returning to the Isthmus in the capital city of Ultimate for the fourth time to host championship weekend. That'll be again on Friday and Saturday night, August 22nd and 23rd. Championship weekend, Madison, Wisconsin. Cam, outside of Radicals players themselves, you've been fortunate enough to play within Breese Stevens Field throughout your career. What's it like playing at that venue, being in front of those fans, just being in kind of the aura that stadium has?
It's incredible. I've told my former teammates for AlleyCats several times, like, Madison is my favorite place to play. Like, I love going there. I always know there's going to be a great crowd. They're going to be completely insane, raucous. You've got the people down kind of in the beer garden area at the back of one end zone. You've got people lining both sidelines. Like, you have fans surrounding you. It's always loud. They heckle nonstop. But the thing I love is that they're also so appreciative of good Frisbee. Like, they really, of course they want their team to win, but they're so appreciative of, like, a good effort from an opponent. Like, in 2022, when we basically knocked Madison out of the playoffs by beating them by 2 up at Breese Stevens, I had Radicals fans who had literally been heckling me the entire game tell me how great of a game I played afterwards. Like, they were just appreciative that they got to watch some exciting Frisbee. And I think that's one of the coolest things about playing at Breese Stevens. You're always going to get a great crowd. They're going to be on you the whole time, but they're also just appreciative of what we're going out there and doing on the field. In 2022, even without Madison at championship weekend, still had a great crowd, still really loud environment. And, Madison's hosted this event several times now. They always do it right. Like, there is no better host city for an event in Frisbee than Madison, for my money. So I just hope that for the first time in my career, I get to play at Breese Stevens for a championship weekend game, because those other years have eluded me in making it to championship weekend. The only time I went was in San Jose, which wasn't a bad vacation, but honestly, I'd rather be playing in Madison, Wisconsin. So, yeah.
You were at 2022 championship weekend in Madison as a formal member of our broadcast and pregame show alongside Ian Toner and Daryl Stanley on that great studio set. Yeah. You mentioned this is now the fourth time that Madison has hosted the championship weekend event. In 2016, 2018, when the host team Madison actually claimed the UFA title, and then also in 2022. In 2016, Dallas went undefeated and got their first title as a franchise, and now defunct Dallas franchise. And then in 2022, New York got their second franchise title First one being in 2019, and then their third one coming in 2023. 2024 champion was the Minnesota Wind Chill. They enter the 2025 season as the prohibitive favorites to both win the division, and I'd say right now is kind of the lean favorites to repeat as potential champions. Where is your head kind of going with this being the announced destination at the end of the season? Obviously, your squad down at Atlanta is going to have their sights set on this being the pinnacle of your guys' campaign. But aside from your own kind of home team bias with the hustle, what are you thinking of with this championship weekend event? Do you want to go straight into our way too early picks and divisional winners? Or do you just all right. Let's start then alphabetically. Let's start with the Central Division. Okay. I'll begin with mine, considering I kind of hedged a bit and already maybe sort of alluded to them. I think the Minnesota Wind Chill will come out of the Central Division for the third straight season and be at championship weekend as the divisional representative. Of course, they're coming off of the title in 2024. They've announced a series of re-signings of their core, as well as adding James Pollard and Justin Burnett this offseason, two of the biggest playmakers in the entire association. I just think that even with Chicago's additions, I want to see what the Union actually put on the field and how that all works together. We've had so many instances in this league, especially in recent seasons, of talent not quite adding up on the field in the same way that it does on paper. So I'm still waiting to see how the Union coalesce as a unit. Obviously, they were one of the hardest chargers against Minnesota last season. They won in their last matchup against the Wind Chill, but for right now, I've got the Wind Chill as slight favorites to win the Central. How about you?
Yeah, I think in the Central, it is definitely a two-team race. I think it's either Chicago or Minnesota. I find it hard to make an argument for any of the other teams in that division because I think it's very likely that Minnesota and Chicago are the 1 and 2 seeds. And if you tell me one of those other teams has to find a way to beat both of those teams in the playoffs to try to get to championship weekend, seems like a tall order. Especially, I feel like there's going to be a lot of kind of cannibalism for the third spot. It's like going to come down to the last week, whereas I feel like Chicago, Minnesota are going to have those spots locked up pretty early. Minnesota's got to be the favorite for me for a lot of the reasons you said. And I think the biggest reason, though, for me is just that cohesion that they're going to have. You know, Chicago is reintegrating some pieces who have been there before and adding in some completely new pieces. There's way too much fluctuation with their roster. To me, that means they're going to be spending a lot of the year just trying to figure out where everyone's, plays best, how they play together. They're going to have way more, hurdles to overcome. Whereas in Minnesota, they're pretty much probably going to be running it back and then just adding a couple of new pieces in. I think that just plays so much better for them. And they're coming off of this season where they obviously won the championship. They're going to be coming into the season with confidence. We saw them take a jump offensively last year. I would not be surprised to see them take another jump this year. And we already know they're going to be one of, if not the top defenses in the league. They're going to be probably top, 2 or 3 in break percentage, top, 2 or 3 in total blocks. Like, you can basically just take it to the bank. So when you have defense who shows up all the time, you're just always going to be in a good spot.
So the potential host team, Madison, just not even in the frame. They made a Central Division championship game last year. They're one of the youngest rosters in the entire UFA. Are we just saying with Chicago's improvement and Minnesota's reloading, that's just a bridge too far for this Radicals team right now? Just too many different dominoes have to fall over in order for that kind of pipe dream to become reality.
I also think we saw last year how fragile that offensive ecosystem is. Pat Schreiwise went down in that playoff game against Chicago, which they were dominating. People might not remember this. Madison was dominating early in that game. It looked like Chicago was going to have no chance. Pat Schreiwise goes down with an ankle injury, and all of a sudden the offense cannot function. I think when you're that fragile as like an offense where you can't afford a specific player to not be there. And I think we did see market differences throughout the season from when Schreiwise was available to when he was not. I think that just creates too many potential issues. And I think it's just the lack of depth that they have compared to those other two teams. We see every year, just like every other sport, getting to championship weekend is a lot about talent. It's also a lot about health. Like, you got to be kind of lucky with avoiding injuries. Yeah. Look at Salt Lake Shred last year, which we'll get to in our West Division. We talk about them. One of the biggest reasons they didn't make championship weekend last year, you could argue, was because of health. They had Joe Merrill, who missed the playoffs. Jordan Kerr was not playing at 100% for the second half of the season in playoffs with the the injury to his hand. We had some Will Selfridge has been a guy who's been great when he's been available, but has often been battling injuries, and you could just see how
Kyle Weinberg and Tony Munga were in and out of the lineup, two of their biggest both defenders in coverage and two-way counterattackers.
100%.
It felt like their D-line had kind of a different throwing lineup every single year, and it felt like it reverted to their initial expansion year form where they were just chucking downfield at times, just hoping for a Jorgensen or something out there in space to go make a play downfield, and it just didn't have the same sort of punch that it had in 2023 when they made the title game against New York. No, I hear you. I feel like Salt Lake is kind of the sleeping giant entering this 2025 season.
Yeah. By the way, is it possible to throw a disc in Salt Lake without it being near a Jorgensen?
Or is it just like... think geographically and realistically, no. But we'll get to West in a second. Wrapping up in the Central, so we both have Minnesota as the favorites coming out of the Central. Okay, let's kick it to the East. I'll let you speak first on your East pick.
Sure. So East one's like probably the trickiest one for me. Well, I say that now I'm thinking about the West with maybe a reloaded Colorado. The East is a tricky one though, because we saw last year just how close it was between the top three teams, between New York, DC, and Boston. Outside of one game, where that final game where DC went to New York and really kind of blew them out, all the games between those teams, whenever they matched up against one another, were like 1-2 score games. Mm-hmm. It didn't really matter who was home, who was away. The game was going to be close. It was going to come down to the wire. Boston showing that in their first year with some new pieces, most notably the two-time reigning MVP Jeff Babbitt, that they were immediately stepping in out of the little brother role and into the, oh hey, I hit puberty too. Now I'm just as big and strong as you. Like, we can fight now, and it's a little more fair. Like, it happened like that. It was pretty crazy that they were able to make that transformation so quickly. And for that reason, I am picking Boston as my favorite. I think New York, and while still morphing into what they're going to be in the post-Babbitt, post-Osgar era, are a little bit more of a known quantity in what they can bring. I think DC is much the same way. Plus, who knows about Johnny Malks? That's obviously going to be a huge loss if he doesn't find a way to stay in DC. Whereas I think Boston, they were just in year one of this new roster, and they were able to make such a leap in 1 year. I think they just have so much more potential for growth. Whereas in DC, that growth right now with what we know is just a little bit more limited. It's more like, do the players who are there get a little better than they were the year before? In New York, it feels like at this point you're not going to get a better version of Jack Williams and Ben Yot. They're probably gonna be about the same. And Ben Yot is getting up there in years. He's probably starting to get towards more of the downslide, or at least the plateau of where he's going to be for now. So I just think there's so much more room for growth in Boston. Seeing where they were last year, they're my favorites, but it is by the slightest of margins.
I think it's so interesting how one game has kind of flipped our most of our notions of this DC team. That just came out of the East Division for the first time in franchise history, made their first championship weekend appearance in 2024, sort of slayed the dragon of New York finally after running into them in so many different playoffs and coming up a little short over the years. And yet one bad wind game, one absolutely disaffected 40-mile-an-hour, take everything you planned and throw it right into a tornado kind of event against the league's best defense from Minnesota. And it feels like we've set this Breeze team back multiple seasons. It feels like we're all of a sudden entering 2025 regarding them as kind of this up-and-coming challenger. I mean, in 2024, they were a team dealing with loss in Christian Boxley, the all-UFA selection, not being available to them. They lost Ben Ort, one of their primary offensive contributors from a very, very good 2023 Breeze team. And yet, 2024 Breeze did better than any other iteration before it. Now, there is the very likely loss of Johnny Malk's two-time All-UFA selection being gone this coming season. Whether he signs with Seattle, takes a gap year, whatever, remains to be determined. But I'll tell you one thing, DC is going to reload. And it's one of those things where we've kind of talked about it a number of times on the show. You and I have talked about it. Daniel Cohen and I have talked about it before. Is there a diminishing return on this specific DC team's depth, especially when it comes to offensive rotations? There have been times where it feels like they've got a 9+ O-line starting roster. And right now is maybe less a little bit more in certain cases. I'm not trying to say that losing a player the caliber of Johnny Malks is a good thing. It never is. But does it allow for more playing opportunities for a Jacques Nissen to step up into a larger role as somebody who's burgeoning into star power in this league, a former Callahan winner? Does it allow Thomas Edmonds to slot more into a full-time offensive role? We've seen what he's capable of doing, in his years with the Thunderbirds in a full primary option facilitator role in an offense. He can fill it up in production. There's playmakers everywhere. They've still got this guy called Rowan. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Won an MVP a number of years ago. Seems to be extending his prime like you and Yacht and everyone else in this league is. There's just kind of a glut of options for this Breeze team. And I hear you about Boston suddenly emerging as this true contender within that division, if not the league as a whole. I mean, anytime you've got Jeff Babbitt putting on your team's jersey, you've got a fighter's chance. I'm just saying, you were mentioning not too long ago the importance of depth, the importance of coaching. This is a DC team too. Let's not forget, in 2024, lost one of the most respected and well-schemed coaches in Daryl Stanley, plugged in Lauren Boyle. And again, she took them to greater heights than they've been to in the past. Like, this DC team, to me, has a pretty good growth component to it. One of the most exciting players last year, Miles Grovic. He was battling with a broken hand too. He looked phenomenal down the stretch for them. AJ Merriman just starting to hit his prime years as a playmaker in this league. Former Defensive Player of the Year, basically a perennial all-defensive selection. Andrew Roy, who is somebody who's probably never going to end up getting a formal UFA award, as sadly as that sounds. One of the best pivot handlers in the entire sport. This DC team is loaded, and I just feel like they finally got a jolt of confidence in taking down New York, and they've got maybe something more important in a game that they can't let go of in that loss against Minnesota in the semifinals. Like, that is one of those ones that fuels you throughout an offseason. And you saw it from the Breeze as it was happening to them. I've never seen a more out of sorts DC team at any level than what happened against Minnesota in that first semifinal game. I mean, they were out of their minds. They were yelling at each other. This is usually one of the most cool and composed lineups in the entire association, just crashing out, as the kids would say. I think that energy has to go somewhere, and I think it's going to go towards fueling this new season and kind of ensuring, possibly similar to you guys in Atlanta, ensuring that never happens again. So I've got DC coming out of the East. You could probably talk to me for 3 minutes about New York or Boston, and I might switch it around. But for right now, I've got DC repeating as the East. So I've got two just chalk picks repeating. Let's go to the South. I've got Atlanta. I feel like I do this every year now. I feel like I pick Atlanta. I love all the team stats. They're, like a numbers nerd crunchers heaven in a certain sense. But I just feel like it's time. And maybe it's a similar sort of Ewing theory thing where two legends and Bobby Lay and Matt Smith step away, and that clears enough air for the new era to prosper. I don't know if it's you joining on as well as potentially some other free agents, but it just feels like this might be Atlanta's year, and it might also be because Carolina gets a little worse, Austin gets a little worse, and LA and San Diego become kind of feeders for a hustle team that looks like a machine against, quasi playoff opponents. So I've got the hustle right now. They're just so balanced on both lines. There's depth. There's an MVP candidate in Hallsmeyer. It's got all the bones for their first championship weekend appearance. And yet we've gone into each of the last two seasons of probably me parroting the exact same words. And yet they come up one goal shy in sudden death against their arch nemesis. So yeah. We'll remains to be seen if another heartbreak is on the horizon for the hustle.
Not if I have anything to say about it. No. Playoff time. I think my numbers speak for themselves, actually. Playoff time. Pretty good. Hoping to bring that same energy down to Atlanta because, of course, we're going to win the South. I mean, what are we even talking about here? Atlanta's going to championship weekend for the first time this year. I'm going to be really excited to be a part of that. It'll be my first time there since 2019. I mean, who else could I honestly pick right now other than Atlanta? I think, you hinted at maybe some other additions that might be coming that might be announced in the near future. I also know of some, former players that are returning, or at least one. I'm really excited to get down there and get grinding with them. And, there's a lot of guys on that team that I really respect. They just still have so many playmakers on both sides of the disc. And you mentioned the balance and really liking some of the players on both sides. Like sometimes we how it is. You focus so much on one player on each side of the disc. At times, like you focus on a Holzmeyer, you focus on a Burnett, that you forget that the best defender on this team last year is still there. His name's Lucas McClamrock. He wears number 3, which I didn't talk about in our episode. I'm not wearing 3 number anymore. I was like, no. Lucas McClamrock has 100% earned the right to wear that number, and I am not going to in any way challenge him for it. I will be making a number swap for the first time in my career in the league. I'll be wearing number 85. Repping my boy John Jones, also Chad Ochocinco. I'm officially changing my name to Cam Ochocinco, so look for that on the horizon. I'm sure my students are going to love calling me Mr. Ochocinco. That'll be great. But no, I mean, there's so many exciting pieces. Jakeem Polk had one of the most, honestly, insane blocks of the season that kind of got flushed under the table a little bit in that game against Carolina in the division championship game on and under that, looked like it was going to be the catalyst to Atlanta winning that game. Like that dude is still an elite athlete out there on the field. I was texted him earlier today actually because he wasn't actually up on the news yet, and I was like, "Hey, we're gonna be teammates, buddy," and we're both really excited to be on the same team. And I just think there's so much, like you said, especially with what we know about Carolina right now. All this could change in the future, but they've lost so many big pieces. And this was a matchup last year that was basically dead even. 2 wins by Carolina, 2 wins by Atlanta, and a championship game that came down to the last point, right? Like you can't get much closer or more even than that. And it just seems like Carolina has lost more than Atlanta has at this point. It seems like Atlanta has lost a couple of guys and is bringing replacements in, and we're yet to hear about what that's going to look like in Carolina with the loss of a first team all defense guy in Henry Fisher, the potential loss of a Sol Yannick, who has been one of the best handlers, whether he's on offense or defense, since he's been in the league. We still haven't heard anything about Elijah Long, I think, at this point either, who was like the unsung hero for that team last year. A guy
I would say team MVP. Like in terms of what he provided to the Flyers in a year where they didn't have Gucho Hannes, in a year in which Yannick wasn't playing much. Their kind of offensive backfield was in reset mode. Yep. Elijah Long stepped up as one of the best volume throwers in the entire association in 2024. And he is yet to be confirmed for their 2025 roster in the scant reporting that has been made available.
Oh, and Anders Jungst, who's been
I thought you were forgetting a
No.
pretty big
No.
name in
I didn't want to.
all UFA, two-time all UFA selection and former
No.
Rookie of the Year,
Yeah.
Anders Jungst.
One of the best offensive cutters, and I don't think that's in any way hyperbolic. One of the best offensive cutters in the league when he's been healthy and available since 2021. Like he has since.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, like he has been incredible. He's been, we talked in the last episode about Matt Smith's quickness and ability to get open and just like separate in those first couple steps. I mean, Durs might be the best in the league at that, to be completely honest. Like he, it's funny because in a league that is so often dominated by cutters that are around 6 feet or taller in terms of like big headlines, you look at guys like Brett Holzmeyer, a guy like Ben Yacht that was that guy for so long. You've got a guy like Travis Dunn who's more of a hybrid, but again, taller guy. You have now this guy in Durs who is at many times the smallest, the shortest guy in the field, and the way he can take over a game and change the way the entire defense has to like respect not only him going deep, but him throwing deep if he does grind out a big under. To lose that, I mean, on top of the other losses, is just like it's going to completely change the way Carolina looks. Tobias Brooks is out in Colorado now.
And yet it's Carolina. It's Triangle Ultimate. They're gonna recharge. We just don't know who it is yet. We
100%.
were worried about them coming into 2024, and they reloaded with a cast of really great defenders, especially rookies. You talk about John Wellers and Christian Bielis, some unsung players for most of the year, and yet they were some of their biggest players down the stretch. You mentioned Jakeem Polk having a big block in that South Division title game. Christian Bielis had 2 of them, including a big one late in the end zone. I wanted to also mention, for our picks of Minnesota and Atlanta in the Central and South respectively, both those teams have boogeymen in Chicago and Carolina respectively. 100%. For as much as we look at Minnesota and we look at Atlanta as being these balanced and pretty proven with some quality wins over the past few years franchises, Chicago and Carolina have always been their anathema, have always been able to just get underneath their skin and make matchups into a 1v1 where it's you versus me, baby, and we're going to take this all the way to the tilt in the fourth quarter, if not overtime. And I stand by my picks for now, but it would not surprise me at all to see Carolina right at the top of those South standings again with the core that they still have. Because, again, we might talk about their losses. We can still talk about Jacob Fairfax, Terrence Mitchell, Ethan Bloodworth, on and on and on. There's just so much talent in that Carolina region. And the Flyers always seem to be able to get all of it on that roster. But we've got to move on to the fourth and final division, and maybe the toughest, as you alluded to earlier, of the entire quartet in terms of picking a championship weekend nomination from the West. I've got Salt Lake coming back and representing them after falling in the West Division title game to Seattle at home this past season. I believe you have the same, but I mean, flip a coin between them, Seattle, and like you mentioned earlier, Colorado. I think Colorado is in for a big bull return this season. You talk about the signing of Tobias Brooks, the reconstituting of that offense. I think having a clearer vision than they've had in each of the past 2 seasons out in the Rockies. The Summit have always been talented. We've known this, but they've kind of been, I think, the example of what happens on paper doesn't always matriculate to the field. I think that changes in 2025. And then Seattle, maybe it's that I'm waiting for a couple of those veteran presences and like the Christian Foster and the Tommy Lees that added so much to their 2024 semifinals push for them to kind of maybe take over and be back-to-back champs in the West for me to really think of it. But Cascades are going to be so good again. I mean, they return Lucas Ambrose, the reigning defensive player of the year. They return Jack Brown, 50-goal scorer, Zeppelin Ronig, Spencer Lofink, a most improved finalist, on and on and on. I mean, Scades are a young team that continues to improve season over season. But Salt Lake, for me, we kind of referenced it earlier. If they're healthy again, if they're feeling themselves again. Last year, it just felt like a shell of the shred, especially once Joe Merrill went down with the ACL tear. It was like losing their team hero and captain all in one, and just kind of was real the salt in the wound of the injury bug that had plagued them throughout the year. And man, to just not have that, to just not be going through all that, and in addition to the kind of burdensome expectations that have been placed on them since the schedule was set, championship weekend was announced, that they would have to host the big event. Like, I don't know, I just feel like they just get to clear out the system, play to the strengths of Bryce Merrill and his coaching staff's schematics, and win again, become another double-digit regular season winning team.
I told Bryce Merrill when we were out there, I was like, I would run through a wall for you. like that dude, when I see like clips of him coaching, I'm like, yes, like get me out. I want to put a shred jersey on right now. Let's go. Like I loved being able to pick his brain when we were out there at Champ Weekend, and just like I got to eat lunch with him one day, and just awesome. Like he is definitely for me like on the, like if you were to put do a coach tier in the UFA, he's right there at the top, like with all the guys that you would place up there. The more I think about it, I think more than any other division, it's going to come down to health. I think we've just seen that. We saw it last year, as we've talked about. I'm still waiting. I don't think it's been confirmed Aaron Wolf is coming back yet for the Cascades.
He was massive. He was so big for the Cascades.
He and Garrett Martin mentioned on his Live with Lep, I think he was talking about, and he is 100% right. We talked about him on the podcast. Like, he wasn't the guy that was necessarily filling up the stat sheet all the time, but like there might not have been a more consistent player for them on offense in terms of you knew what you were going to get week in and week out than from him. Like he was the steadiest presence on that offense, because it was a team that could be a little
best defender on a turn too. The amount of layout blocks he got. I mean, again, I think I mentioned before on the show, I'd put him in that category of like a Jacob Fairfax or something, where he's just able to wing you the disc should your offensive unit make mistakes.
I think he's so important to that team that if we heard he wasn't going to be back, like I think I would really favor Salt Lake and Colorado as like more likely to come out of that division, just because, like you mentioned, I mean, he's the best defender on a turn. He's the steadiest presence on the offense. You lose a guy like that, I mean, it really changes how you have to function as a team. I ping pong back and forth between Salt Lake and Colorado, because the more I think about it, the addition of Tobias Brooks, I think we talked about the maybe addition by subtraction, knowing that Nethercutt is out from day one. Instead of wondering how many games is he going to play, when is he going to show up, when is he going to be there, when is he not going to be there. I think just knowing a little bit more who's going to be there on a consistent basis and what you have to rely on is going to improve things. I also think about the fact that they didn't have Quinn Finer.
I was going to say, Quinn Finer started 5 games and they went 4-1 in those. So
yeah, by the time he was back, they were almost eliminated from the playoffs. Like he really didn't have a lot of opportunity to like affect things, and so I think it's going to come down to health. Like with that being said, if I had a fully healthy Salt Lake, obviously minus Joe Merrill, who we know is not going to be healthy this year, unfortunately, and a fully healthy Colorado, I think I give the edge to Colorado. So I know we talked pre-show and I was like, I think it's Salt Lake. I'm backtracking a little bit. I think you give me every team fully healthy. I'm taking Colorado. I think it's similar to the East, where it's probably pretty thin margins, though. But I'll tell you what, I'm also taking Colorado for maybe the most exciting team in the league, or like the most must-watch team with, as we mentioned on the last pod, the speed and athleticism on that offense is going to be so much fun to watch. I can't wait to see how it all shakes out once they actually get into some games. But yeah, we haven't even talked about Oakland, who made the playoffs last year. And I think that just shows how deep and competitive this division is going to be, because, Oakland, they're pretty young. If they return everyone back, you would imagine all those players are just going to keep getting better because they do have so many young pieces. I mean, that's a team that on a given day can compete with any of those teams. So they're a little bit more up and down. They they definitely play a fast and loose style of Ultimate there, and it seems like they kind of rope their opponents into doing the same. But there seems to be a method to their madness because they were doing a lot more damage and being a lot more consistent with coming out with victories last year, where they really struggled the year before to do that.
And, they were within a goal late in their first round playoff matchup at Seattle against the Cascades. I mean, the Cascades put it away with their typical brand of playmaking in deep space and some counterattacking on their D-line. But the Spiders kept coming in that. And to your point, they're still one of the youngest rosters in the entire association. So to see another mini leap from the Spiders, as well as another crop of fantastic rookies, would surprise no one. But that'll do it for this episode of Championship Weekend Discussion. Again, August 22nd and 23rd, Madison, Wisconsin. That is the location and the dates you should put right away in your brain and in your calendar, whether that's on a wall, in your phone, wherever it may be. Championship Weekend 2025, returning to the capital city of Ultimate. That'll do it for this episode of Swing Pass from Cam and I here and now, but we will be talking to you in short order with more news and information from around the Ultimate Frisbee Association as we dig out of this deep winter off season and head closer and closer to the start of the 2025 UFA season. Can't wait to talk with you soon. Bye now.